Joe.
I'm Nat.
And
we're here to show you how to replace the alternator on a 2002 Honda Civic.
Well, that was an attempt.
Brand new alternator. Look at that fresh alternator from Rock Auto.
Rock Auto!
So first thing you need to do is disconnect the negative on your battery, and that's pretty easy to do. You gotta use the pliers.
Make sure you have a wrench with 3 joints. Taking the battery apart.
So you're going to remove that battery cable so you don't have power going to where you're going to be working.
And then you're going to move over to the power steering pump and reservoir, and you're going to be working in that area of the car the rest of the day.
So there's 3 bolts, 1, 2, and 3. They're all 12 millimeter except for 3, which is 10 millimeter.
Let's start by spraying it down with a concerning amount of penetrating oil.
Yeah. Like a fuck the planet amount.
It'll burn off when you start the car back up.
And so you have to loosen bolt 1. Now the second step is to pop this reservoir out so you have access to bolt 2. It's on a metal track, it just easily slides up, and we're going to keep all the hoses on in this video just to make things a little easier. And so then you can get to bolt 2 and loosen it up.
And you just wiggle it out, give it a little wiggle. Like Cooper White would say, not a lot, not nothing, but just a little wiggle. You know what I mean?
And once you get bolt 2 loosened, move on to bolt 3, and it's actually this wing nut on this metal arm at the top of the alternator, or the power steering. And so you're going to loosen it up, and as you loosen it, you should then be able to pivot the power steering unit down. And your goal is to get it down enough and loosen that belt on it that you can slide it off. Then we're going to take that belt out, so then we don't have the power steering unit.
Yeah, you want it totally disconnected so that you can start to get things out of the way.
Then we're going to completely remove the 3 bolts. So bolt 1 you completely remove, bolt 2 you completely remove, and then for bolt 3, instead of completely removing that wing nut, we're going to loosen that 10 millimeter bolt right above it. And so you're going to take that bolt out, so you're leaving that wing nut arm still attached.
It makes it easier putting everything back together when you're done.
And then we can pull both the power steering pump and the reservoir out of our way. And again, we aren't disconnecting the hoses. We're just going to gently put them over out of the working space.
I don't know how I would go about putting those back together anyway.
And so now we're going to work on the alternator, getting that out. And it's connected in a very similar manner with bolts 1 and 2 needing to be loosened so we can get to that tensioner to get the belt off. What a great diagram.
Drew it myself.
Bolts 1 and 2.
Freehand. So again, you can hit these with a little penetrating oil to loosen them up, and we're going to start with the bolt 1 at the top of the alternator. We loosen it up, we don't take it all the way off, and then here is where your butterfly nut should be, but in our case we had an aftermarket bolt, so we're going to loosen that up a little bit to help with the most difficult bolt, bolt 2, which we had to view from the wheel well, but you want to reach down from above the alternator, get in there and get that loosened up, not all the way off, so that you can go back to the butterfly nut, loosen that enough to push down on the alternator, create enough slack to get the belt off. And that belt will string off of the alternator and the AC and the engine crank, and then we're gonna tackle completely removing bolts 1 and 2. But to get bolt 1 out, in our case, we had to also remove the metal arm that holds the power steering reservoir up above.
Because it just gets in the way. So if you do that, it should be able to slide out enough that you can completely disconnect the alternator. And so with that, you should be able to pull up on the alternator and get it out of that little wedge it's in. And then you want to turn it to the right and access the electrical components on the side. And we're going to remove those too. And so for these, we have a 4-pin plug and an alternator cable connected with a bolt.
Wait, how that size? 10 millimeter?
It was small.
Probably. Start by releasing the wiring housing. There's a tab that you push that is connected to an arm on the alternator.
Peel back the rubber and the nut cover so you can get that nut out, and then you can pull away the plug.
The 4-pin adapter, the green one, is still going to be connected, so be careful. The housing for these wires can be pretty brittle, so don't bend them too much.
And so our plugs were pretty tight in there, so for the 4-pin cable, we actually had to remove the alternator completely out of the car, and that made it a lot easier to get to. So if you do this, just be careful with the cable and take care not to pull too hard on anything. And that's it. Alternator's
Oh
out.
goodness, it was pretty old, dirty thing.
So we got the alternator out. So let's put the new one back in. So our alternator came with this clip. It's number 2 in this picture. You might not have that on your new alternator, so you have to transfer it over to your new one. And so you're going to put your alternator, the new one, in. And the first thing we did was position it the way we had before, where we had the electrical components facing up. And that made it a lot easier to get the 4-pin plug back in, as well as that bolted on alternator.
And then you're ready to take the alternator and place it back in the orientation that you found the old one. So we attach the top first by putting bolt 1 through its mount and through the alternator, and what that'll do is hold everything in place while you get the rest of the system set up.
Bolt 2, man, that's the kicker. So it's sliding on this track, and it also has the tensioning screw attached to it. So this video's up in the wheel well, but it's a lot easier to tighten and play with from the top. So hopefully you have 2 people. And so what you want to do is thread bolt 2 through both the alternator as well as that tensioning screw.
I think it would be easiest if you release the butterfly nut enough that everything can sit at the back of the track, because that's where the alternator naturally wants to sit.
Position that bolt and just try to tighten it till it goes.
This was my least favorite thing.
Okay.
And so once you get that feat of mankind done, then you can wrap that alternator belt around the 3 cranks, so the main, the AC, and the alternator itself. And it's the bigger?
Yeah, bigger on the engine crank.
And it's the bigger crank on the engine.
It'll match the belt width.
And so then you can start playing with that butterfly adjusting screw. We had a nut again, as it's an aftermarket bolt, but you can adjust it such that the alternator belt has about a 1/4 inch of play. Once you are happy with the amount of play, you can tighten bolts 1 and 2 completely so everything stays locked tight together. And then we're done with the alternator, so we can reattach that power steering reservoir mount that was in our way for bolt 1, and just put it back on and tighten it so it can hold the reservoir. And now it's time to get the power steering back. So we can just put the reservoir and the power steering unit itself back into place. It might be a little hard to get in there, but you got it out. You can get it back in.
Yeah, so just start by focusing on wedging it in and getting bolt 1 through the hole in the mount. That'll help hold everything in place. And then you also have the arm for bolt 3. You can use bolt 1 and bolt 3 to hold the power steering pump generally in place, and then this is going to feel real familiar to you since you already put the alternator in. You need to take the bolts and get them all tight enough, just Cooper White tight, not too tight, so that you can still thread the belt through and then tension it with the butterfly nut. So here we are putting on the nut for bolt 1. We're gonna just get that to hand tight to hold things, and then we did this a little too early, but don't forget to reseat the reservoir for the power steering in its mount. Unfortunately, if you put it there right now, you can see here threading bolt 2 into the power steering pump and then seating the nut on that is kind of hard in the limited space. So here it comes popping through, and now the power steering pump is exactly where it needs to be, but getting this nut on can be hard. You can drop it, it's frustrating, you're at the end of the project. Get it on there not too loose, not too tight.
You can then get that belt back on, and so it's going to be on the smaller of the cranks coming out
Of the engine.
and you're just going to loop it over that power steering pump. And again, you want to tighten that wing nut bolt so you get about a 1/4 inch of play in the belt.
Whatever that means, I have no idea, but Looks like that.
Once you do that, you want to tighten all the bolts back up so they're locked tight, and then let the car run for like 5 minutes, and then you can do any final adjustments you may need for that belt.
Once it's kind of in its happy place. And then you're done. You should have a working alternator, so congratulations to you.
Ah, we're mechanics. It's working. Vroom, vroom.